on Plugged In, America's military foothold in Asia may be slipping.
The Americans are very rude.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte ending a major security pact allowing U.S. forces to train on Philippine soil.
That's fine. We'll save a lot of money.
U.S. President Donald Trump is downplaying the importance of the Visiting Forces Agreement. But military officials say it could be a major turning point for U.S. strategy in the region. What happens to America's military presence in the Pacific? And what could it mean for China's ambitions in the South China Sea? Plugged In examines U.S. Philippine relations at a crossroads. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. Once a reliable military ally, the Philippines appears poised to turn its back on a long-standing military agreement with the United States. Earlier this month, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte announcing his decision to end the Visiting Forces Agreement with the United States. That agreement, the VFA, allows American soldiers visa-free access to train at military bases in the Philippines. Top American military officials say this decision is a major misstep in U.S.-Philippine relations. But we begin with a brief history of the colorful and sometimes contentious relationship between the two countries. More from Plugged In's Mil Arcega.
It's a relationship that dates back to 1898, to the end of the Spanish-American War, when Spain ceded colonial control of the islands to the United States. The American occupation would lead to a brutal struggle, the Philippine-American War, resulting in the deaths, by some estimates, of as many as 1 million Filipino citizens. But under American guidance, the Philippines became an autonomous commonwealth in 1935, gaining its independence in 1946, and adopting many of the same democratic and political institutions as the United States. Since then, the Philippine Islands have been pivotal to America's presence in Asia and the Pacific. Because of its location and its strategic importance, the capital, Manila, is home to the only Veterans Administration office and the largest American military cemetery outside the United States. In 1998, the two countries signed the Visiting Forces Agreement, giving the U.S. government jurisdiction over its military personnel and removing visa and passport restrictions for American troops deployed to the Philippines. The U.S. has also been an important ally in the war against Islamic militants in the southern islands. Today, more than 20 U.S. bases and military facilities, occupying over 90,000 hectares of land, house an estimated 25,000 U.S. military and civilian dependents in the Philippines. While relations between the two countries run deep, U.S. military presence in the islands have long been a source of tension for many Filipinos, one fraught with cultural grievances and the complexities of their shared 120-year history. For Plugged In, Mil Arcega, VOA News.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is downplaying the Philippine government's notice to terminate the Visiting Forces Agreement. Trump says ending the pact will save U.S. taxpayers a lot of money, but analysts say it would also hurt U.S. credibility and create another opportunity for China to expand its influence in the region. More from VOA senior White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara.
For decades, American and Filipino soldiers have trained together under the 1999 Visiting Forces Agreement. President Donald Trump said the U.S. has been instrumental in helping the Philippines fight the Islamic State terror group, but dismissed Manila's notice to terminate the VFA, saying the move will save the U.S. a lot of money.
And my relationship, as you know, is a very good one with their leader, and we'll see what happens. They'll have to tell me that.
Trump's statement contradicts his Secretary of Defense, who says the VFA termination runs counter to efforts urging China to abide by international norms in the region. Earlier this week, Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte made the announcement after criticizing Washington's reported decision to cancel the U.S. visa of his former national police chief. The former police official enforced Duterte's war on drugs, which killed thousands and is condemned by human rights groups.
Trump
and others are trying to save the Visiting Forces Agreement. I said I did not want it. The Americans are very rude.
One is that napakabastos ng Amerikano.
Unless a new deal is reached, the VFA will terminate in 6 months. While many within the security establishment in Manila and Washington want to maintain the pact, resistance from both leaders may make it difficult.
Rodrigo Duterte hates the Americans, wants to align the Philippines with China, and has been saying that the Visiting Forces Agreement should go for decades. Donald Trump despises alliances in general, thinks they're a waste of money, and just said that he doesn't care if an alliance ends. All of that is very consistent.
The Philippines is the oldest U.S. treaty ally in the Pacific, older even than the Japanese and Korean alliance.
If the narrative becomes that the Philippines walked away because they saw the Americans as a paper tiger, then that becomes self-reinforcing. It starts to raise questions about U.S. credibility throughout the region. The second, maybe more immediate impact is that it really empowers China to do whatever it wants in the South China Sea, because without access to the Philippines, the closest U.S. ground-based military power is 1,300 nautical miles away in Okinawa. That is hardly an effective deterrent.
Analysts say that not having American troops in the Philippines may hamper intelligence gathering and counter-terror operations, and could mean a slower American response to help the region deal with natural disasters.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte says he is not worried about potential disruptions to his country's counterterrorism efforts. He adds his decision was based partly on the U.S. government imposing travel and financial restrictions against Philippine officials. Here in the U.S., still no word on possible talks to salvage the VFA agreement. Joining us in the White House to talk about the political and security ramifications, senior VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara. Patsy, nice to see you. And Patsy, is this more of a grudge match between President Duterte and President Trump? He says the United States is rude. Or is this because Philippines want to get more independent, want to lean towards China?
Well, certainly the personality aspect of both leaders do play a part in this kerfuffle, as we say, because as we know, President Trump, surprised his aides when he basically said that, to me, it doesn't matter if they walk away, it will save us a lot of money. This is contradictory to what his Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, said just the day before when he said that this is a wrong move, a move in the wrong direction by the Philippines. And even just hours earlier, before President Trump said that he didn't mind for the Philippines to walk away, his Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley, as well as members of his national security team, told me that they were trying to get the Philippines back into the negotiation table. Now, President Duterte himself has always been an anti-American. He has been years trying to disengage from the American alliance and align himself closely to China. So, yes, personality does go into account into this calculation, but certainly for the Philippines, this is something that they have wanted to do to align themselves closer to China, while for the U.S., the president has basically very little regard in terms of military alliance, particularly in the region in Southeast Asia, despite the fact that the U.S. has a free Indo-Pacific strategy.
Patsy, the 1998 VFA is not the only sort of alliance that we've had with the Philippines. It's gone back decades, has it not, where we've had military support to the Philippines and training?
Yes, absolutely. And this VFA agreement is not just an agreement that allows, once or twice a year kind of exercises between American troops and Filipino troops. There's hundreds of exercises that they do together every year, and this will all be in jeopardy. And don't forget that this will also mean that there's going to be less capacity, less capability for the U.S. for intelligence gathering in the region, for counter-terror operations in the region, and of course, things like what I mentioned before in my package, helping the Philippines to mitigate disasters. So this is, a lot of people see this, a lot of analysts see this as a lose-lose situation for both the U.S. as well as the Philippines and as well as the region, not only in terms of containing China, but also affecting other countries like Indonesia, like Malaysia, like Vietnam, all these regional countries who will take the brunt of Philippines, which, for example, has more terrorist groups like Abu Sayyaf, could spill over to Indonesia's Jemaah Islamiyah. So this really has a lot of repercussions in the region.
Patsy, the United States, though, isn't left high and dry in the region. They have Japan, they have South Korea. The president says it's going to save a lot of money for the taxpayers. I don't know if that's true or not, but has the president of the White House put any money figure on this?
Yeah, so they have not given us an exact figure, but yes, he is right in terms of this is one of those one of those alliances where the U.S. puts in money to the Philippines, and the Philippines does not give anything in return other than this very strategic base where the U.S. Military can operate from. So there's other alliances in the region, as you said, South Korea as well as Japan, but the Philippines is particularly strategic because of its location in the South China Sea. And don't forget that the Philippines is also a party, or one of the parties that are involved in the conflict with China, as well as several other countries in the region in the South China Sea, particularly in the Spratly Islands. So if the Philippines is aligning itself closer to China and the U.S. has less capability to insert itself in that dynamic, that's definitely a minus for the U.S. as far as the analysts that I've talked to are concerned.
Thank you. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA Senior White House Correspondent. So what happens to American military personnel now in the Philippines, and how might this impact U.S. military strategy in Asia and the Pacific? VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has been looking into that for us. She is back from the Munich Security Conference in Germany, where U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper delivered remarks. Welcome back to the United States, Carla.
Thank you. Good to be back.
All right, so you had a chance to hear from the Secretary of Defense, Esper, on this. What did he say about this?
Well, as Patsy just touched on, he said that it was very unfortunate. We actually asked about this twice, right after it happened, and then after he had had a couple days to think about it. And then when I asked him in Munich, he again reiterated that it was unfortunate, but he didn't seem too worried. Let's take a listen.
This would be a move in the wrong direction, but we have time to respond and work with them on the way forward. And I'm hopeful that given the longstanding ties between our militaries, between our peoples, between our countries, we'll endure, and we'll just take it one step at a time.
And defense officials that I spoke with did say that there has been some posturing involved with this, that this was potentially a nuclear response to a very small issue, but they know that they have 180 days to work this out.
It's sort of interesting, though. We just listened to what Secretary Esper said, and the Filipino military also doesn't want the VFA to go away. It's Duterte saying this to President Trump. Duterte says the United States is rude. They've done this saber rattling. It's now 180 days. Is this really sort of strategic, or is this about that visa that wasn't awarded the Filipino official?
Well, a lot of people think that this is very much to do with that visa, and this is Duterte acting out. But if you take a step back, this has been bubbling up since 2016, since Duterte first came into office. He's made no qualms about how he feels about America. He does not like the American alliance. He feels that there are war games going on the Philippines whenever the U.S. comes in and carries out exercises. And you can see this play out because I was there with Secretary Carter when he had his visit in the Philippines in 2016. They announced a new agreement with new access to bases, 5 different bases. We went out to one, Antonio Batista, out at Palawan near the South China Sea. We hopped on a carrier. They had joint exercises in the South China Sea together for the first time in 2016. Then Duterte took office, and all of a sudden he says, we don't want the U.S. forces in the south of the Philippines where they're carrying out counterterrorism exercises. He said that right as Secretary Carter was in ASEAN in Hawaii with the Filipino defense minister, who walked that back as much as he could. Carter at the time said that the relationship was ironclad, and then it started to go away. But then you look in 2017, and you see how Balikatan, which is that big exercise that the U.S. and the Philippines have every year, 5,000 to 10,000 U.S. and Filipino troops, that was changed a little bit. Normally it's on conventional warfare. Because Duterte said that they were war games, they scaled it back and focused on humanitarian issues and humanitarian exercises. But again, a couple of exercises were canceled, and then 2018, 2019, everything was back to normal. You saw no changes to Balikatan, nothing. So we've seen this before, and you just have to wait and see whether or not this is going to be huge, or if the U.S. are going to be able to weather this with the Philippines again, as they did in 2016 and 2017, and things will go back to normal.
All right. So this Duterte has given notice. It's 180 days. We're 5 or 10 days into this. If this were to hold, if the United States and the Philippines can't work this out, what kind of assets are in the region? What's the sort of practical impact on the United States?
Okay, you're not going to like the answer to this. It varies from time to time. But on average, there are fewer than 400 U.S. troops in the Philippines on any given time. If you talk about 400. If you talk about right now, they have this exercise going on with the Air Forces called Base P. So they have plussed up at the moment right now. So there are more. There are F-16s over there at the moment right now carrying out these exercises. When Balikatan happens, they'll bring over some amphibious equipment, and there'll be some more things with fighter jets and whatnot. I know that they had F-35s at Balikatan last year. Maybe those will come back. But they move in and out throughout the region. So it wouldn't be too difficult for the U.S. to pull its forces out, but it's the strategic location to be able to go in and out so easily, to be able to have those bases to go in and out of so easily. That's so important. And it's the optics of it, kind of like Patsy was talking about. This is the oldest alliance, military alliance in Asia. Goes back to the 50s, before Korea-U.S. military alliance in 53, before U.S.-Japan in the 60 and 59 or 60. So for them to move out and change this would be a huge deal. But on the flip side, after the optics, when you really think nuts and bolts of the military alliance, it doesn't look like anything could change military to military. They still remain strong. And there are other countries in Asia that we don't have this VFA, this visiting forces agreement. Thailand, for example, next week we're going to have a big exercise on, in Thailand. There's no visiting forces agreement there, and they still have great relations. So I can see that happening if this thing falls apart.
Aside from the optics side, who really stands to lose if this VFA goes away? Is it the Philippines or is it the United States?
I think it would be a little bit of both, because the Philippines has prided itself on being that strong alliance with the United States. If you talk to people of the Filipino military, they're kind of trying to walk back things as much as they can, but they have to follow their president's orders at the same time. But this would also be huge for the United States. Like I said, the optics for one. Then you talk about the national defense strategy that the United States has focusing on China. It's really hard to keep up with what China's doing in the South China Sea without forces nearby.
China's probably watching this with glee.
I think that they are watching this with glee. It's been no secret that Duterte wants to get closer to China.
But his military doesn't.
But its military doesn't, and that's because they've been militarizing in the South China Sea, which the Philippines claims, which China claims. So China looks at this as an opportunity to continue to militarize and to continue to bully in the area. And that is one thing that U.S. officials have pushed me on. They say, we are having this spat. Yes, the U.S. and the Philippines are at a crossroads right now, but we can talk it out. Whereas if they were having this with China, China would bully and get their way. At least the United States has a precedent that says...
But the Philippines or Duterte hasn't asked for anything. Like, okay, we'll put this back on the table for X. Not yet.
Not yet, but that could be coming up. There was a 5-year agreement signed in 2015 that's going to be ending this year, a military aid package. It was almost $500 million in aid. So that could be something that we see coming out in those closed-door negotiations.
And, of course, if the Philippines get hit with a typhoon or something, because the U.S. military has helped in a humanitarian crisis. But, Carla, thank you. Carla Babb, our VOA Pentagon correspondent. Correspondent. Foreign affairs experts have long said that having an American military presence in the Philippines is not just essential to the security of both countries, but also serves as a check on China and China's military ambitions in the South China Sea. There are also major economic variables in play involving several nations. For starters, nearly $3.5 trillion worth of global trade passes through the South China Sea every year. It is a vital trade route recognized by the global community as international waters, which means no one country can lay claim to it. But China has to a degree. In 2014, the Chinese started massive dredging operations to build artificial islands around several reefs located on the Paracel and Spratly Island chains. Visual reconnaissance conducted by the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force confirms buildings, roads, and runways on those artificial islands. And according to a 2018 Pentagon report, China placed anti-ship cruise missiles and long-range surface-to-air missiles on the Spratly Islands. U.S. jets on occasion fly close to the islands to make the point that they have the right to do so under international law. But despite the American flyovers, the Chinese have continued to build on these islands, leaving many to wonder what might happen if the U.S. were to leave the nearby Philippines. President Rodrigo Duterte, who has expressed a dislike for the United States, has openly courted China in the past. But both Filipino lawmakers and top American military officials have gone on the record to say that severing ties with the United States would leave China firmly in control of an important global trade route. So where does the 120-year alliance between the United States and the Philippines go from here? And what is the likely impact of this to neighboring countries? My next guest says that the two countries have weathered far worse storms than this. Satu LeMay is director of the East-West Center in Washington. He's also director of the Asia Matters for America initiative and founding editor of the Asia Pacific Bulletin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greta.
Is this a serious matter that's going on, or is this just another sort of saber rattling between two presidents and sort of an international spat that's going to vanish?
Well, anytime a U.S. ally makes a decision to announce the termination of a bilateral arrangement for military cooperation, it's a very serious matter. So we cannot be complacent about it. But in the long history of U.S.-Philippine relations structurally, we've had ups and downs of very serious nature. A Senate vote in '91 in the Philippines to remove U.S. bases at Subic Bay, a natural disaster that buried in ash Clark Air Force Base. And we've recovered from those, as well as over the last couple of years under President Duterte since his election in 2016. So it's serious, but I think we're turning a page or opening a chapter rather than closing the book on the U.S.-Philippine alliance.
I guess as I look at this, I see the more serious issue on this is not so much Duterte and President Trump having their back and forth, but more as like with China and the South China Sea, and if the U.S. loses sort of one of its footprints in that region of the world, that changes the dynamics. I mean, I've seen China build up in Cambodia and other nations in Southeast Asia. I mean, China's on the rise there.
There's no question that this potentially, if it goes through and becomes final, could be a win for China, perhaps for Russia even. But there are three big optics here. One is the view of the U.S. and this administration towards alliances and maintaining them. So this is a test case of all these discussions about whether alliances are worth it or not. Second, about the specific arrangement. And third, really, how important the U.S. presence in the Philippines is for our larger Indo-Pacific strategy in a context of great power competition. And other countries are going to be watching. Do we try to save this alliance? How do we do it? What are the negotiations that we do? Do we offer anything? Does the Philippines respond affirmatively? So in a way, it's a test case for alliance management that Japan, Strategic Framework Agreement, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, and others will be watching.
And who controls the South China Sea? I mean, all that global trade. I mean, it's China is sort of inching in a direction to control more and more of it.
Yes, China has definitely asserted what are quite patently inconsistent claims, historical claims to features and this sea. But I would just say that it doesn't control the South China Sea. The U.S. has a very robust presence in the South China Sea. It's international waters. So I don't think they have taken control.
I suppose that's true as long as it has its presence in South Korea and in Philippines. The U.S. and we fly planes in the region.
Yes.
But as it's sort of is there a chance that it's just sort of getting eroded?
There is always a chance that we are not responding in the way we need to. But I will just say that there is general confidence that the U.S. force posture, U.S. forward presence, U.S. capabilities are still robust enough to deter. And that's really what the U.S. forward presence and posture is about, is deterrence, avoiding a conflict, not necessarily fighting one. And I think the Philippines is important to that part of that presence and posture.
How important is it as the rest of the world watches this? Show goes all around the world. I mean, if you're in Africa, for instance, and you're watching this, are you thinking to yourself, well, that's just the Philippines and the United States, we're over here, or does this have a profound sort of global impact?
As I said, for the reasons that there have been articulations from this administration questioning whether alliances make sense, they're financially worth it, they have dividends and payoffs for the American people and the American government, people will be watching in a way that they might not have been watching 20 years ago or 15 years ago for a spat that could be worked out at the Defense Department level. So I do think it has big implications. We'll just have to see. It happened on February 11th, the announcement. So we're really just a couple weeks in.
I guess so. What's a little bit different than this? I mean, the president, has done some saber rattling with NATO, saying, maybe we'll pull out of NATO because they're not paying or whatever. I mean, he has bluffed like that. But in this particular instance, it's not the U.S. walking away from the VFA. It is President Duterte who is pulling the plug on it, if indeed he pulls the plug on it. There are 180 days to this.
Right. That's right. This is not a case in which the U.S., in fact, I just go back a year, 2 years. President Trump went to the Philippines, met Mr. Duterte at the East Asia Summit in 2017. Secretary Pompeo went there and restated the importance of the alliance, made a specific statement on the importance and applicability of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And here we are with Philippines responding to this issue of potentially this visa. We're not sure exactly what he's responding to. But I do think that cooler heads will prevail in the next 180 days.
And the U.S. has aided the Philippines in its fighting terrorism.
Huge. The Marawi attack by the militant Islamists in 2017, the U.S. intelligence, reconnaissance, advice, the Balakatan exercises that were mentioned earlier in your program. This is the VFA is part of a scaffolding of the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Arrangement, and the VFA. If you start pulling stuff out, the scaffolding could fall. But what you need to do is make sure that you reinforce it. And that's what the next 180 days needs to be about, is reinforcing that alliance. We've been seeking to do so.
Or if you're Duterte, you better look to China to see if China's going to step in and do all the things on terrorism, military protection, and national disaster help.
Well, given China's behavior on its Uyghurs in Western China, I don't think I don't think you can count on them to come to the Philippines. And also, my understanding is the Chinese too are worried that the Philippine-U.S. relationship does go through ups and downs, and there may be an up as a result of this.
We're at a down right now. We're at a down right now,
but we could reinforce the relationship by renegotiating some elements of it and making some elements stronger.
Satu, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Satu LeMay, Director of the East-West Center in Washington. And before we leave, an update on the coronavirus outbreak. Health officials in China are reporting a declining number of new cases. But the World Health Organization is cautioning that it's too early to draw any conclusions from the apparent decline in new coronavirus cases in China. So far, nearly 2,000 people have died from coronavirus, and health officials around the world continue to urge people to take all appropriate precautions. For instance, in Bangladesh, where at least 300,000 Rohingya refugees live in a very crowded condition in Cox's Bazar, preventive measures are being taken. Here's VOA's Kevin Enix.
Bangladesh health officials say the country has yet to have a positive case of coronavirus. But while the virus hasn't spread, tensions have. Special precautionary measures are being taken in Cox's Bazar, which is a border district and home to one of the world's largest refugee camps, housing at least 300,000 Rohingya. People from different countries, including Chinese citizens, are working on ongoing development projects and aiding the Rohingya camps. Local government says all ports have checkpoints for testing any incoming traffic.
I set up a checking point at Cox's Bazar Airport and Teknaf Land Port. Foreigners have been kept under special surveillance, including Chinese citizens. We have all kinds of preparations.
Isolation wards and cabins have been prepared at the Cox's Bazar District Hospital as precautionary measures. Public awareness programs are also being implemented in the highly populated Rohingya camp.
Health education is being provided at the Rohingya camp. Various programs have been taken to prevent the spread of the virus.
All health advisors at this time suggest basic hygiene solutions like washing hands regularly. For Muazzam Hossein Shakil in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, this is Kevin Enochs, VOA News.
Thank you to my colleague Kevin Enochs. And that's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America. You can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And do follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thanks for being plugged in.